I never thought a single experience could flip my entire worldview. But it did. I used to believe life was black and white, science on one side, religion on the other. Then I encountered near-death experiences, and suddenly everything cracked open. It started with a book. In 1978, I read Dr. Raymond Moody's Life After Life. One idea grabbed me by the soul: veridical perception. People clinically dead, floating outside their bodies, seeing and hearing things they shouldn't be able to. And later, those things are verified. Not dreams, not hallucinations. Real. That haunted me in the best way. Years later, when I was finishing my doctorate, I had to choose a dissertation topic. I went back to those stories. Most people dread their dissertations. Me, I fell deeper in love with the mystery. Since then, I've spent decades exploring what happens when we die, and what that means for how we live. People don't come back from these experiences the same. Neither did I. I've learned this. Sometimes what looks like the end is actually the beginning, and the more I study this, the more I understand. Consciousness isn't trapped in our skulls. It might just be eternal. Even after all these years, after reading thousands of near-death experience accounts, I still pause when a new one lands in my inbox. Every month, through the International Association for Near-Death Studies, we send out a hand-picked NDE story to our members, and I drop everything to read it. You'd think it would get old. It doesn't. There's something about these stories, not just the surreal imagery or the mystery of life after death. It's the truth that echoes through them, truth that speaks beyond language. I've read accounts from doctors, mechanics, children, and even skeptics who had their world turned upside down. One that still gives me chills is the story of a woman declared dead, placed in the morgue, only for her brother to find her, crying. Yes, actual tears streaming down her cheeks hours after she was pronounced gone. Her body wasn't ready, but her spirit never left. And when her brother cried out, "Do corpses cry?" she was rushed back to life. Another that stays with me is of a soldier wounded in combat. He told me, "I didn't float toward the light. I was carried." He described angels with voices like thunder and light that knew his every secret, and loved him anyway. He came back changed. So did his whole family. And of course, stories like Dr. Mary Neal's, underwater for 30 minutes, no heartbeat, no breath. Yet she returned, not only with peace, but with knowledge of future events that would unfold just as she had seen. That kind of precision is not imagination. That's transformation. I can't pick just one story. I can't. Because each one is like a beam of light cutting through the fog, reminding us that what we think is the end might just be the threshold. It's not just about surviving death. It's about what these experiences teach us about living, compassion, purpose, connection. I believe deeply that these moments aren't just random. They're invitations, whispers from the other side saying, "You're more than this body, and you're never alone." There are some stories that never leave you, no matter how many you hear, no matter how many pages you read. Some moments just stay burned into your heart. I've spent decades immersed in near-death experiences. I've read thousands, spoken to survivors, documented cases, and still, each new account feels like opening a doorway to something sacred. One that still stuns me is the case of Anita Morjani. She was in the final stages of lymphoma. Her organs were shutting down, her body covered in tumors, and every doctor around her had given up hope. She slipped into a coma. But what happened next shattered every expectation. She described rising out of her body and being met by her late father. Together they stood in the hospital room, watching her body dying. When she asked how she could possibly return to such a ruined shell, her father didn't answer with science. He answered with something deeper. He told her, "What you choose now will determine the outcome of your blood test." Let that sink in. Reality wasn't fixed. Her will, her spirit, could bend it. And when she chose to return. Within days, the tumors were gone. Her body healed. Science had no words for it, but the soul did. I've seen this pattern too many times to ignore. People clinically dead for 10, 20, even 30 minutes. No heartbeat, no oxygen. Come back not just alive, but changed. Clearer, kinder, stronger. And not just in the West. I've encountered stories from India, Africa, indigenous tribes, people who'd never heard the name of Jesus, yet encountered light, love, and sometimes beings that took the form most familiar to them. A man in rural Kenya described being embraced by ancestors who gave him a mission. A woman in Thailand told me she met a radiant figure she later associated with Buddha, but in the moment, she just knew it as pure compassion. These experiences transcend religion. They speak a universal language: love, purpose, unity. One atheist who had a near-death experience told me he met Jesus in a suit. And when he asked why Jesus was dressed like that, the reply was simple: "It's the only way you'd take me seriously." I laughed. And then I cried. Because that's the kind of God I believe in, one who meets us where we are. The deeper I go into this work, the more convinced I am that reality is more fluid than we think. The physical is only part of the picture. There is something more, something waiting for us not just after death, but within life, if we're open enough to see it. And maybe, just maybe, we're all being called to remember who we truly are, before we forget again. People often ask me, are near-death experiences just a Western phenomenon? And my answer is always, absolutely not. I've spent years diving into stories from every corner of the globe, from the temples of India to the deserts of Africa, from indigenous communities in New Zealand to the icy expanses of Siberia. The Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, NDERF.org, has become a treasure trove of these accounts, and thanks to researchers like Jeff and Jody Long, many of them are now accessible in English. It's humbling to witness how these deeply personal stories echo across cultures and time. One of the most powerful NDEs I read was from a Maori woman in New Zealand. She didn't travel through a tunnel like many Western experiences describe. Instead, she soared over Aotearoa, the sacred name for her homeland, guided to what she called the leaping-off place of souls. She described seeing every river, every mountain, as if the land itself was saying goodbye. It wasn't a tunnel, but the essence of the experience, that movement through space towards something beyond, was the same. And that's when it hit me. The structure of these experiences is universal, but the expression is beautifully personal. A 5-year-old boy once described his journey as going through a giant noodle. A truck driver told me he shot through a massive tailpipe. Another said it felt like flying through space, with stars whispering truths. The destination might be the same, but the path is painted by our culture, our language, even our childhood memories. It reminds me of something deeper, what Noam Chomsky once called deep structure in language. Beneath the surface, all languages share a common architecture. I believe NDEs work the same way. There's a shared spiritual blueprint. But how it's experienced, that's tailored to culture, to belief, to the soul. What's even more fascinating, sometimes people encounter things that contradict everything they believed. A lifelong atheist meets a loving presence they never expected. A devout follower sees something entirely outside their doctrine. It's not about religion, it's about truth. And maybe that's the most beautiful part. These experiences, whether ancient or modern, Eastern or Western, aren't about proving a point. They're about connection, something greater, deeper, and more real than anything we've been taught to expect. You know what's wild? In so many near-death experiences, people say the first thing they see isn't a blinding light or a cosmic gate. It's their grandmother, or their childhood dog, or their late father standing there with a smile. Sometimes it's Jesus. Sometimes it's an angel or a guide they've never met before. But one thing is consistent. Someone familiar shows up. Someone who makes them feel safe. And now I get why. Crossing from this life into the next, it's not gentle, it's a jolt. Like being yanked from underwater and tossed onto dry land. You're suddenly in a different realm. And so, just like a child needs a parent's hand on the first day of school, we need something or someone to help us adjust. To remind us, you're okay, you're safe, you're home. Years ago, I started a small research project, curious about how Jesus appeared in NDEs. I pulled every account I could find that described his appearance, and what amazed me was that no two people saw the same Jesus. Some said he had brown eyes, others said blue. Some heard his voice like a symphony, others like thunder. One experiencer was even asked, "How would you like Jesus to appear?" It blew my mind. The presence molded itself to the person's heart. Why? Because this is personal, deeply personal. Love meets us exactly where we are, and that love, it doesn't always come with a choice. Some people are told gently, "It's not your time." Others, they argue. Kim Clark Sharp, a well-known experiencer, told me she went back and forth with the being in front of her. "I'm not going back." "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not." Guess who won? She's here to tell the story, but not everyone is given a say. Some are snapped back into their bodies like a movie reel cutting mid-scene. Others return because of one thing: love, a child, a partner, a mission not yet complete. What fascinates me most is what happens after. That PS at the end of the letter. The after effects. Psychologically, people change. Deeply. They come back less materialistic, more empathetic. They no longer fear death. They've been there. They know. Spiritually, many let go of rigid religion. Not out of bitterness, but because what they experienced was too big to fit into one doctrine. As one experiencer told me, what I saw was truth, and it didn't belong to any church. But not all walk away. Some, like a Catholic friend of mine, dove deeper into their faith after their NDE. He even became a deacon and started his ministry by preaching about near-death experiences. Because sometimes your journey isn't about leaving the system. It's about transforming it from within. Others still interpret their experiences through the lens they already know. They see Jesus not as a person, but as a presence. Christ consciousness, a force, a light. Maybe both are true. One thing's clear: these experiences shake everything. But they don't just tear down old beliefs. They plant seeds for something more expansive, more alive. And maybe that's the point. Not to give answers, but to awaken the question inside us. What if there's more? And what does that mean for how I live today? After my near-death experience, something in me cracked open. I wasn't just curious about the afterlife. I was hungry for it. I devoured spiritual books, watched documentaries, listened to people share stories that mirrored parts of mine. It was like my soul had touched something eternal, and now it refused to let me go back to sleep. But it wasn't just curiosity that pulled me in. It was the change, in myself and in others who'd been through what I had. Many experiences, myself included, come back with what some call spiritual gifts, abilities that seem like fiction until you live them. I started picking up on things, dreams that came true, moments of deep knowing, even feeling other people's emotions as if they were my own. At first, it was beautiful, but it was also overwhelming. I learned there's a difference between after-death communication and mediumship. After-death communication is personal. It's when I sense or speak to someone I loved, like my grandmother, who passed years ago. Mediumship, though, is more public, tuning into people I've never met, carrying messages to strangers. Some people are born with it. Others, like me, seem to wake up to it after crossing to the other side and coming back. But the gifts don't stop there. My body changed, my sleep patterns, my appetite, even how I processed medication. Things that used to feel normal suddenly felt too much. Noise, crowds, fluorescent lights, they overwhelmed me. My senses had turned up to 11. My nervous system, it seemed, had been rewired. And then came the weirdest part, electronics. I couldn't keep a watch running. Every battery I wore died within days. TVs would glitch when I walked by. Street lamps would flicker overhead. One woman I met couldn't use credit card readers. They just froze. Another had to stand on an anti-static mat before entering her lab because she kept frying sensitive equipment. It sounds crazy, but it's real. We even have a name for it: electromagnetic after effects. I remember interviewing someone who said her boyfriend complained that every time she entered the room, the TV would change channels on its own. He thought it was the remote. She knew it was her. When she got emotional, it happened more. That's what fascinates me. Emotion. It's energy. We feel it. It has weight. And sometimes that weight shifts reality in subtle but undeniable ways. I've also seen people come back more sensitive, not just emotionally but spiritually. Some can't handle parties anymore. They pick up too much. The veil between them and the world has thinned. One woman told me she stopped watching the news after her NDE because it hurt too much. She felt the grief, the fear, the chaos. She had to learn how to shield herself, how to build new emotional boundaries. And then there's precognition. I've met people who've seen deaths, disasters, even pandemics before they happened. One woman told me she asked it to stop. She didn't want to know, because knowing the future isn't always a gift. It changes everything. Think about it. If someone told you that you had exactly 2 weeks to live, would you live those 2 weeks the same way? You wouldn't. Knowing the future rewires the present. And maybe, just maybe, we're not meant to know. At least not all of it. Some things, I believe, are sacred because they're hidden. But here's something that gives me hope. More and more people are sharing these experiences. What used to be a whispered story behind closed doors is now something people talk about, openly, courageously. But how do we know who's telling the truth? It's a fair question. I always say this: look at what they're risking. Real experiencers often hesitate to share. They know the cost. Especially professionals, doctors, scientists, engineers. They come from fields rooted in materialism. If they talk about meeting angels or visiting other realms, they risk being mocked or dismissed. But they come forward anyway. Not for fame, not for money, but because the truth is too big to hold alone. I know of a surgeon who had an NDE and didn't say a word for 10 years. It ate at him like a secret. Finally, he shared it. His voice shook, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of carrying something sacred for so long. I call it spiritual constipation. You want to release it, but only when it feels safe. Thankfully, the world is changing. Podcasts, books, shows like this. They're making these stories normal, and that matters, because normalization opens the door for healing. I'll never forget one story. A patient flatlined during surgery. When he came back, he described seeing the surgeon flapping his elbows like a bird. Everyone thought it was nonsense, until they found out that this particular surgeon, trained overseas, had a habit of pointing with his elbows to stay sterile. There's no way the patient could have known that, unless he was watching from above. That's called veridical perception, evidence from outside the body that proves the experience was real. It's in a book we helped compile, The Self Does Not Die, filled with over 100 similar cases. And then there's Dr. Eben Alexander, the Harvard neurosurgeon whose brain was effectively mush during his coma. No brain activity, no hallucinations possible. And yet he experienced a realm more vivid than anything on Earth, where he met a woman he'd never seen, who turned out to be his biological sister, who died years earlier. He didn't even know he had a sister. That shook me. These experiences defy logic, but they don't defy truth. And maybe that's what I've come to believe most deeply. We are not just flesh and neurons. We are spirit wearing skin. We come from something greater. We return to it. And if you've ever lost someone or feared death, I want you to hear this. Death is not the end. It's a doorway. And on the other side is more love, more light, and more truth than you've ever imagined. Most people think of near-death experiences as bathed in light, peaceful, blissful, full of love, and many are. But what I've learned over the years is that not all NDEs are like that. A small but significant number are deeply distressing or even terrifying. And I've spoken to people who've gone through these hellish moments and came back changed forever. I've come to use 2 words to describe these experiences: pleasurable and distressing. Because interestingly, even the painful ones often lead to powerful transformation. And sometimes those beautiful, blissful encounters, they can make coming back to this world disorienting, even painful in their own way. The distressing ones often fall into patterns. One of the most common is resistance. Imagine being pulled through a tunnel at the speed of thought, but you're clawing, digging in your heels, terrified. The very thing that might have been peaceful becomes horrifying, not because of where you're going, but because of how tightly you're trying to hold on. I've heard many say the moment they surrendered, just let go, the fear vanished, and light replaced it. Then there are the stories of complete isolation. I'll never forget a man who told me he was suspended in a dark, endless void. He said he felt hyper-aware and utterly alone, forever. No sound, no light, no presence. Just nothing. It was the most frightening thing he had ever experienced. But what stayed with me was what he said next. I think I was given exactly what I had spent my whole life asking for, to be left alone. Raised in an abusive home, he'd learned that solitude was safety. So he built a life of distance. No friends, no vulnerability. But in that void, he realized that isolation wasn't safety. It was suffering. That experience cracked him open. Today, he said, he's a different man, learning to trust, to connect, to live with an open heart. That's what many call a blessing in disguise. Not all stories end in light. Some take years to process. A few never fully resolve. But even in those cases, something changes. Something begins. One man, after surviving a suicide attempt, saw the pain his death would have left behind. His mother receiving the call, his daughter crying alone at her graduation years later. He lived through their heartbreak, and in that pain he realized, life is not just mine to take. He cried out for help, and was answered. Again and again I've seen this pattern. When someone calls out, whether to God, Christ, light, love, they're met with mercy. So yes, some NDEs are dark, but the story doesn't end in the darkness. It's what we choose to do with it that defines the path forward. I've spent years listening to near-death experiences, and one thing continues to fascinate me. The ones who go through something dark, something terrifying, chaotic, or painful, don't stay there. There's almost always a turning point. One man told me he was in a bleak, scorched wasteland, nothing living, no light, just despair. He didn't believe in anything, no God, no soul, no afterlife. And then, just as the fear swallowed him, a hand appeared from above and pulled him out. In that moment, everything shifted. Darkness gave way to light. He was met with understanding, even love. That moment, it stuck with me, because it mirrors a deeper truth I've come to believe. Distressing NDEs are not punishments. They're wake-up calls, course corrections, spiritual interventions designed with our transformation in mind. Not everyone sees the light right away. I've heard stories of people who only experienced the dark, void, terror, isolation, and returned before any relief came. But even then, those experiences often lead to a deep and lasting change in how they live. Like one man who was completely alone in a void. Years later, he realized he had spent his whole life isolating himself from others, trying to be invisible. That void, it was the life he'd created, reflected back to him with brutal honesty. And that's the soul-level work these experiences seem to trigger. Whether bathed in peace or shaken by fear, something breaks open inside. Now, this isn't something I've proven in a lab, but from everything I've seen and heard over the years, I believe NDEs are part of our soul's development. Some of us grow through love. Some of us grow through fire. But we grow. It's like parenting. Some kids listen with a whisper. Others need a sledgehammer. Spiritually, I think it's the same. Some souls need a gentle reminder. Others need a jolt. And sometimes that jolt comes in the form of an NDE. I've heard people describe NDEs as exit points built into a soul's blueprint. Before birth, they say, we sit with a council of light and choose a path, filled with key lessons, relationships, and purpose. But life happens. Free will kicks in. We wander. We get distracted. We chase things that aren't truly ours. And sometimes, we forget why we came here. That's when the soul intervenes. Maybe you overdose at a party. Maybe you're in a terrible accident. Maybe you're in a hospital room on the brink. Whatever it is, the NDE becomes the reset. The moment where your soul asks, do you want to keep living this way? Or do you want to return to the path you chose? I've spoken to people who came back from their NDE with a clarity they'd never known. They realized their life had veered off course, and the experience, however painful, snapped them awake. Just like in Scripture, when Saul was struck blind on the road to Damascus, sometimes we need to be stopped in our tracks before we can truly see. And here's the thing. NDEs don't always happen during medical emergencies. Some happen during deep meditation, some during trauma. One man told me he was in the middle of a screaming match with his girlfriend, blinded by jealousy, when suddenly he was outside of his body, communing with what he called a being of light. He had a multi-hour conversation in what felt like minutes. When he returned, he finished the sentence he'd started, only differently. He said their relationship was never the same. It became deeper, kinder, more conscious. That's the mystery of NDEs. They don't just happen to the dying. They happen to the disconnected, to the lost, to the overwhelmed, to those who are ready, whether they know it or not. And while no two experiences are identical, many follow similar threads. The person is suddenly outside their body, watching from above, seeing everything with normal plus perception. They can hear conversations down the hall, see through walls, move at the speed of thought. Some are greeted by loved ones, some meet a divine presence. Some review their lives in exquisite, sometimes painful detail, feeling everything they gave or withheld. And some, yes, find themselves in the dark. But here's what I've come to believe. No one is left there forever. Even those who don't see the light in the moment often find it afterward, through reflection, healing, or a lifetime of transformation. That's the grace behind even the hardest NDEs. As it says in Psalm 139, verse 12, "Even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." I believe every NDE, whether radiant or raw, is an invitation. A reminder that we are more than flesh, that we came here with purpose, that there is something beyond the veil calling us to remember who we are. And sometimes it takes dying to really start living. I've heard many stories of people who, after leaving their bodies, found themselves drifting upward, sometimes seeing a light to the side, sometimes floating toward it as if drawn by love itself. Then, just beyond that movement, something extraordinary happens. They cross into what I can only call the trans-material realm, a space more real than anything here, yet unlike anything we've ever known. I've listened to people describe landscapes where every blade of grass seemed alive, conscious, where colors shimmered that don't exist on Earth, where music wasn't just heard, it was felt, like the entire environment was singing in harmony with their soul. And in that place, they meet them, loved ones who passed before, pets they hadn't seen in years, sometimes beings they didn't recognize, but somehow knew. It was like I'd known them forever, one woman told me. Not from this life, but from something older. And yes, some meet figures like Jesus, Mary, or other spiritual beings. But others meet entities who were never human, guides, guardians, what some call a council of elders. They don't speak with words. Everything is telepathic, instant, pure. You have a question, and the answer comes like a wave of truth. One man said, "I didn't just see love, I became it." Most people at some point go through a life review, but it's not judgment in the way we think. It's not a courtroom. It's a mirror made of memory and feeling. They relive moments, forgotten ones, ordinary ones, but from the other person's perspective. The smile they gave a stranger, the words that broke someone's heart. They feel it all. That's when they realize, when I hurt you, I hurt myself. When I loved you, I loved the whole world. That moment changes everything. I'm reminded of what Jesus said in Matthew 25:40. "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." That isn't metaphor, it's spiritual physics. And then there's a choice, sometimes. Others are simply told, "It's not your time." Some return through the top of their head. Some say they just wake up in their body, but almost all speak of a boundary, the point of no return. A door, a river, a misty field. Cross it, and there's no going back. Even the animals are there, dogs, cats, birds, horses, even those never owned, but somehow connected to the soul. And yes, a few experiencers have described encounters with non-human beings, even intelligent life that never walked this earth. What I've come to believe is this: that realm reflects not just where we've been, but who we truly are. It shows us what matters. It strips away ego, fear, and illusion, and it welcomes us back, not as strangers, but as children returning home. You know, people often ask me what it means to live a fulfilled life. And for me, it comes down to this: knowing why I'm here and doing my best to live in alignment with that purpose. It's about being guided by something greater, but also choosing every day to say yes to the path that feels true. If I could go back and speak to my younger self, I wouldn't try to fix everything. I'd simply whisper, "Hang in there. You're going to be okay." Because even the pain had purpose. Even the confusion was part of the unfolding. Nothing was wasted. When it comes to God, or Source, or whatever word resonates, I once had an experience that changed everything for me. I was in a deep, altered state, completely detached from my body. Floating in space, I entered a vast darkness. But it wasn't scary. It was sacred. At one point I said, "I'm not me anymore." I had no memory of Jan, no identity, no story. I was one with the nothingness that is everything, a pure, still presence before creation takes form. That, to me, is God, not a being, but the beingness from which everything arises. And what I've come to learn through research, stories, and my own heart, is that every single life has meaning. Near-death experiences often return with a simple but powerful message. We're here to grow in love, to learn, yes, but mostly to love better. As Jesus said in John 13:35, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." If we all made decisions from that place, love for each other, love for the earth, love for our own souls, imagine what kind of world we'd live in. So, if you're watching this, maybe you needed the reminder: your life matters. You're here for a reason, and even when it's hard, keep going. You're becoming who you came here to be. So here's what I want to leave you with. You are not here by accident. If you've watched this far, I don't believe it's a coincidence. I believe you were meant to hear these words right now, at this exact moment in your life. Maybe you're searching for meaning. Maybe you're carrying pain. Maybe you've been asking, "Why am I even here?" I've asked those same questions. And through all the stories I've heard, all the research and my own experiences, I've come to one unshakable truth. You were created on purpose, for a purpose. And no matter how far off course you think you've gone, no matter how lost you feel, you're never beyond God's reach. Ever. Sometimes it takes breaking down to break through. Sometimes it takes being shaken to awaken. But hear me now, your life has value. Your breath matters. You're not random. You're chosen. And if no one's told you this lately, let me be the one. You are loved. Not for what you've done, not for what you've achieved, but because you simply exist. Because God made you, and He doesn't make mistakes. If anything in this message stirred something in your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below. Share your thoughts. Your story could be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Let's start a conversation that could change lives. If you felt something today, if a light flickered inside you, hit that like button. Not for me, but for the message. And if you want to keep going on this journey of truth, faith, healing, and hope, subscribe to this channel right now. I'm going to keep sharing messages like this. Messages meant to wake up your spirit and remind you that you are part of something far bigger than this world. And share this with someone you care about. You never know who's silently struggling, who's praying for a sign, who's waiting for a voice to say, "You're not alone." This isn't just content, this is a calling. So join me. Comment, like, share, subscribe, and above all, stay open, because when you do, you'll find that God's grace doesn't come in thunder or lightning. Sometimes it whispers through a video at 2 a.m. when your heart is finally quiet enough to hear it. And I pray right now, as you're watching this, that God blesses you deeply, powerfully, undeniably, that He wraps you in peace, in healing, and in purpose, and that your next step is one of faith. This is just the beginning.